Hello, this is Jim McKeith, Developer Evangelist for Embarcadero Technologies, and welcome to this Developer Skill Sprint on using Android intents for inter-app communication. Down at the bottom, you see that link there, embt.co/sprint-android-intents. That has a link to more information, including eventual replay, slide downloads, everything else you'd want to know about this Developer Skill Sprint. This skill sprint works with Android. Android intents is an Android-specific feature, so it doesn't work on other platforms. It does, however, work with both Object Pascal and C++. We are doing two separate skill sprints, one for Object Pascal and one for C++. So if you're a C++ developer, know that even though you're only going to see Object Pascal code today, this all works with C++ as well. So come back on Thursday and sign up for the Thursday Developer Skill Sprint series to see the C++ demos. On the agenda, we have an introduction to intents. We're going to talk about the difference between explicit and implicit intents, show how to send intents, how to receive intents, and how to set up intent filters. We'll look at a demo of receiving both text and images via shared intents. So an intent is a messaging object that you can use to request action from another app. So the typical uses you're going to see is you're going to start a specific app or activity, or you can start services. We already looked at services previously. Intents are a great way you can use to start services, but you can also use them to deliver a broadcast to any app where you can just broadcast across the entire device. So there's two different types of intents. There's explicit and implicit. Explicit intents are sent to specific apps or services or activities. So when you want to send it to just this one specific activity, use an explicit intent. An implicit intent is used to broadcast to all apps that have a matching manifest with an intent filter in its manifest. So in the activity, you set up a manifest intent filter that says, if there's a implicit intent that matches this filter, let me know how to deal with it. Okay? Let's take a look at this in action with Delphi 10 Seattle. So this is a slightly modified version of the Android intent sample that we ship with 10 Seattle. I'll explain the differences as we go along here. First of all, I've added an edit box here on the send intent sample so that you can change the text of what gets sent. So there's two parts here. There's the send intent app and the receive intent app. The send intent app does, like the name implies, it sends the intent. It broadcasts the intent so that the receive intent app can accept it and receive it. Now it has two buttons here. Basically just sends you different bits of text. And what I've done is add this edit box here so you can change exactly what the text gets sent. So we'll take a look at this one here. And we have a method in here called send text via intent that we've created down here. And it passes in this text. And this is where it adds that edit box text into it. It's creating the intent object. So remember, the intent is a communications object. And we construct it here and we set the type. So the type says what kind of data type it contains. So we're saying it contains text Pascal. So just like you would MIME types on the web, same sort of syntax here. We have text, specifically Pascal. And then we have the action. The action says we're sending this for somebody to view. Okay? And then in the extra is where we're putting the text that's passed into us. So see, this text is all passed in here through a text. We're converting it to a JString and putting it in the extra text of the extra. So there can be lots of extras. Extra is just kind of this bundle that you can stick different things in, and you can stick an extra text in there. And the extra text in this case is the text that we're broadcasting to the other app. Now this here is where we're going to the package manager. The package manager manages all the apps that are installed on Android. And we're saying, is there an activity that can receive this intent default? So only if we're looking for one there's a default. If there's one that accepts this as default, that's what we want to know. If there is, then we're going to say start activity. So we're not specifying a target here. We're just saying, here's the intent, send it off, OS, broadcasted to all apps that have an intent filter that matches text passed with view action. Okay. If the package manager says, sorry, then nothing found, then we'll get this message here, receiver not found. That's all there is required to send an intent. Now let's take a look at receiving intents. This is a little more interesting part here. So in our constructor here, we're going to query the platform services to see if it supports application event service. And if it does, we're going to set an application event handler, handle app event, which is right here. Okay. And then there's actually two different ways you can receive these intents. And so we're handling it both ways. So you're going to want to experiment with your app and see which way makes sense, or if you want to handle it both ways, whatever works best for you. So the other way here is we're going to say register an intent action view. And this is a modification I made here that I'm also changed it so that I can receive images, which I'll show you how that works later. So then we're going to say, we're going to set up subscribe to the message here, and the handle message activity is, or handle activity message event handler, which is this guy here. Okay, so both of these point to handle intent action. So you handle intent action. It just does some filtering and setup in order to push it in there. So here, this one is the startup intent. So handle app event, this one happens when the app is launched, and we get an intent out of that when the app's launched. Now, if the app's already launched, then this is the one. This one here will handle the intents that's sent to us. Okay, and then down here, handle intent action is where we're going to actually handle this intent we received. So here's that J intent. Remember, we constructed the J intent here, and then we've received the J intent on this side. Okay, so we're going to just display some of this information into the memo box. So let me move this in the other order here. So the first thing we do is we said, hey, we're handling an intent action of data, and we're going to say what's the type, which should be text Pascal, right? And the action, which should be the view action. And then we're going to go to the extras. Remember I said extras is a little bundle that can have other stuff in it. So get the extras out, and if there is extras, then we go in here and say get the string that is the extra text. And remember, extra text is the Pascal string that we injected in the intent on the other end. Okay? So now I also modified this so that we can receive images. And so what we do is here we look and see if it's a parcelable. Now technically we should look at the type and say, is this a text Pascal or is this a image JPEG? And then have a different course here. But we're not doing that. So what it does, it just looks to see if it's parcelable. And parcelable is another way that you can put extra data in there. And images are parcelable. And so if it's parcelable, then we say we got a parcelable, and then we extract the URI. So the URI is an identifier for that image. And so it's not actually streaming the image to you. It's instead giving you an identifier so that you can request the image. And then we call this method here the URI2bitmap, and we pass it in that URI and then image1.bitmap. So image1 is on our form here. I've added this image1 on the form. And here it's going to go through and it's going to decode the stream, which it then requests open input stream here based on the URI through the content resolver. Okay, so this is the way the Android handles the ability to stream data between the apps. So the stream didn't come through the intent. Instead, it gave me this URI, which I can then pass to the content resolver to get the stream, which I then decode into a bitmap, convert the bitmap into a surface, and then assign the surface to the bitmap on the form. Okay, and you do that through the tthread.synchronizer tthread.q, because this is actually coming in through a different thread. Probably ought to do the text in there as well, but it's not as big a deal for the text as it is for the bitmap. Okay, so that's all there is to there. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. Oh, wait, one more thing. I'm going to show you here the manifest file has been modified. So in the manifest file, by default, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, so you have your activity, which is the FireMonkey native activity, and you have an intent filter. This here says that your intent filter is launchable by the launcher as the main activity. Okay, so action is main, category launcher. So this is launcher. This is my main activity. So you can have multiple activities within your app bundle, but one of them, if you want to be launchable, should be your main activity. So see here we have our activity defined right there. Okay, so now we also want this activity to handle the text Pascal file. And so we have another intent filter here that says action view, and it's the default. Remember, we're checking for default. It's also browsable. And we're saying the MIME type is text Pascal. Okay, so this is what's necessary in order to receive that text Pascal intent from the send intent. So send intent is going to send that text Pascal looking for a default viewable or viewer, and it's going to find this intent filter here. Now also, if you ever shared an image using like the share sheet or any other another number of ways of sharing images on your Android device, you can say, hey, I want to register to receive images. And this is what you have to do here. You say you want to action send, you want to be the default, and image asterisk. And so this way it'll do image JPEGs, image PNGs, any type of image that's being shared on the system. This will say, I can handle those. Okay, so let's take a look at this in action really quick. So here's the app running on my Nexus 5 running Marshmallow. So this is the send intent, and I'm going to send hello world, but I'm going to modify the text in here so it's not just boring hello world. My name is Jim. We'll say send hello world. So at this point, the intent has been passed off to the operating system. The operating system says, oh, I have 2 apps that claim they can open this. I have the NS Note Editor, which says it can open anything that's text. It doesn't care what it is. Or I have my receive intent. And I've actually opened it with receive intent before, which is why it's up here at the top. If I hadn't used that before, it would be listed down at the bottom. They'd all be listed together. But it says you've used this one before, so it's put up here at the top. Now, if I want to always use receive intent, I just tap the always button. If I want to just use it just this once, which is what I'll do now, I say just once. And so now it's launched my app, and we see here it's added in the memo box that says, oh, it's data, text Pascal, action view, and then here's the text. Hello world, my name is Jim. Okay, so that's all there is to sending the text via an intent. So now let's take a look at sending an image. Send a image to it. I'm going to use the Google Photos app here. So here's a very true fortune I received in a fortune cookie. Actually, I didn't receive this one, someone else did, but we're going to share it. And I tap, we see all the usual suspects for sharing an image here. But up at the top, you see receive intent. That's because that's the last one I used when I tested the demo. So I would tap receive intent, and it downloads the image from Google Photos to my local machine. And we see here that up at the top, the text that shows us is that we received image JPEG, action send, and it says, oh, it's a parcelable. And we got this big old huge URI here. And this URI knows how to be resolved. So it's Calm Google Android Apps Photos Content Provider. So the content provider is a way you can stream data between apps. So Google Photos had a content provider, and it's going to use that resolver in order to load that image. And you see down at the bottom, we got the image loaded here. You are not illiterate. Okay, so that's all there is to receiving an image. I don't need to open the keyboard up. Using the sample code I showed you, you can build on that based on all the other stuff as far as how things are shared between apps with Android by consulting the Android documentation. And you're good to go to enable inter-app communication on Android with intents. For more information, there's a few entries here in the 10 Seattle Doc Wiki library section. On the first one's on the IFMX application event service, which is what you use to determine if you can receive events, and then the messaging manager. The most interesting one probably is going to be the Android intent sample. This was the basis for the sample I showed you today. You can find out more information about the sample there in the code samples doc wiki. And then also take a look at the Android documentation. You're really going to need to understand the way intents work, consult the documentation on Android, and then experiment with how you want to receive these intents and the way this behaves on the device itself. If you want to find out more about some of the other new features in FireMonkey and also some information on the way the intents work, check out the Code Rage 10 session on what's new in FireMonkey 10 Seattle. Link down there at the bottom. All these links are also available at the blog notes link you see there. Next time, we have regular expressions and the TRegX class. For full schedule, check out the link there. Regular expressions will be on Tuesday, the 8th of December, 2015, a week from today. Again, the Tuesday session will be the Object Pascal session, and then the Thursday session will be the C++ session. There are the times. Remember, all the times are based on San Francisco time, so check timeanddate.com to make sure there haven't been any unexpected changes in time zones, daylight savings time, etc., and make sure you show up on time. Give me a moment to tell you briefly about the promotions we have available for anyone that upgrades to Delphi, C++ Builder, or Rad Studio 10 Seattle. Between now and December 31st, registered users of any earlier version can qualify for upgrade pricing. This is a savings of up to 45% off the new user price. Additionally, all registered users of 10 Seattle get access to the bonus pack. The bonus pack includes the new book by Nick Hodges, More Coding in Delphi. This covered writing solid code, aspect-oriented programming, parallel programming, and many more patterns and practices. Also, the new book by Marco Cantu, The Object Pascal Handbook. This is a modern language guide that covers many new language features as well as the core runtime library. Additionally, you get the MIDA Converter Basic, which does a lot of the heavy lifting to help you convert existing VCL applications to FireMonkey to take advantage of multi-device development. And also the VCL and FireMonkey premium styles. These premium styles give you the styles you need to have your application really stand out and have a professional look and feel. The styles are also available for consistency between VCL and FireMonkey to give you consistent look and feel across platforms. Also, as a special offer between now and December 18th, if you buy or upgrade to Professional, Enterprise, or Ultimate, you can additionally get Konopka Signature VCL controls for free and CodeSite Studio 5 for free. If you upgrade to Architect, though, you get the RAD Studio Solution Pack for free, which includes most every component you need for your application development. All this you receive immediately without any extra steps on your part. For more information about these special offers and more, visit embarcadero.com/radoffer. Thank you for joining me today. If you don't already have 10 Seattle, be sure you download the trial and explore using Android Intents in your own application today.
So it was pointed out that if you are wanting to support other platforms, you want to make sure you put if-defs around the Android-specific things in here, which will become very clear as soon as you switch platforms and try and compile on another platform. It will say, whoa, this doesn't work on iOS. And then you'll say, oh, yes, and if-def that.
So I had a question.
Yes.
As I always do. So you showed sending text back through an intent. You showed bitmap. You can send any kind of data, right? As long as you know what you're receiving and be able to parse it and do something with it. Is that correct? Like correct. If I want to send a class instance or some customer data from a data set or whatever, some JSON.
So you could send some JSON. I believe there is a limit to how big how much data you can send in an extra. I don't recall what it is offhand. I'll look real quick if I can find it. But yeah, you can send anything in there. And so in the example we showed, we sent the MIME type of text/Pascal, and then the NS notepad's like, oh, I can open text files. So actually, if you try and open the NS with the NS Pascal, it's expecting it to be sent through a content provider like the images, and so it's like, oh, I can't open this file because there's no file reference in there. So really, if you're wanting to send something that's only for a other specific application of yours, you want to make sure that your MIME type is not
standard, right? "Quote unquote" standard.
Yeah, standard. Yeah. So
a contact record or a calendar entry or whatever. There could be other apps that know about this.
And so if you are sending a standard MIME type, you want to make sure that you're sending it according to the way Android says to other apps are going to expect it. Now, if you're wanting to just send something between your apps, then make up a MIME type, make it a GUID. I don't care. You can do whatever you want to do at that point, but keep in mind that you are blocking anybody else from being able to receive that, and then only your other apps. And so you also could make it an implicit intent, which we didn't get into a whole lot of details on how to do implicit intents, which is where you send it to a specific app by its full class name. So yeah.
Intent is app to app. This is not like app tethering through TCP/IP or whatever. This is inside of the Android operating system, just as we would do a similar thing on Windows, right?
Exactly. Yes, this is app to app within a single instance of an OS. So it's within a single Android device. It's not going to allow you to talk to other Android devices or other device types.
Because on Windows we have drag and drop. I guess with Windows 10 there's contracts?
Yes, share contracts.
Shared contracts where you can, and they're sharing on iOS as well. We use the share sheets and so on to share bitmaps and text and other things.
Yep. It's actually the data was sent through extra text, and there's also things like extra email, extra other things that you can send in there as well. So if you take a look at the Android documentation, it tells you all the different extras you can put in there. Yeah, I'm just looking around. I don't see anything about how big the extra can be, but so you probably are able to put just a little JSON on there, something like that, without any trouble. But I don't. I know there is a limit. You're not going to, for example, you're not going to encode an entire JPEG image and stick it in the extra. That would not be the way to go. I'm not sure what the downside of that be, but I know that's not what their recommended way of doing it is.
A high resolution image or video.
Yeah, don't put that in extra.
Yeah, don't put that in the extra. So here's a question. I think it was something we were just talking about as well. Again, Android intents are specific to Android. There are other sharing mechanisms for iOS, OS X, Windows that we talked about, right? The share sheet.
Yes. Yep.
And so on.
So the share sheet works across platforms and is on Android under the covers is going to send an intent to do that. So an intent is sent under the covers to do a share sheet. And so, for example, when I shared that image from Google Photos, it was sending an intent out, which it goes to the share sheet functionality, just like you would if you were sharing an image from your app. And then under the covers, it says who has an intent filter that can accept this image type. The same, actually, so we had that call there where we looked to see if there's anything that can handle a text Pascal. And so it's doing that exact same call and then displaying that list. So it's just for images instead of text Pascal. So under the covers of the share sheet, it is using intents. Exactly what we're showing here, just using it in a slightly different way. It's a standard way of sharing things.
Yeah, there's another question. You can look in the Q&A log, Jim, about he's got a website and he's browsing using an Android browser with his web page. Would that maybe use intents to get to an app? Or could it?
If I have a website and I browse through an Android browser and I open a web page sending also, I'm not sure. So, will your app open? Okay, so there's a way to do this. I think I understand what you're saying. So, if you're like Twitter, like someone goes to uses the Android browser, they go to the Twitter website. It says, "Hey, do you want to open this tweet in the Twitter app?" It's using intents to do this, and I can't remember. It's something you put in your manifest, but yeah, you can. That's something you can do. It's just not. It's not exactly what we're showing right now, but it's very similar because what you're doing is you're associating your app with a specific URL. Twitter.com/ for example. And so you can do that, and then if someone clicks a link that would take someone to Twitter, it can say, you have an app that could open this link instead, and if you say okay, then it will send that. Now remember I showed there's two different ways you can receive the intents from the app. One's by a launcher, and the other's if your app's already launched. So what will happen is that URL will come in through that one that's launching your app. So your app will get launched, and it'll say, hey, your app was launched, and here's the URL that they tried to browse to. Now, so you need to make sure that if you are going to a specific page within your site, that you actually go to that page in your site and not just launch your app to the home page, because your users will be annoyed. Remember, the IMDb app, when it first did this, I'm not sure if it does it now because I quit using it because, I was looking up a star from a movie, and it says, oh, you want to open this IMDb app? Oh, that'd be great. And I open the IMDb app, and it takes me to the homepage for IMDb. I'm like, no, I have found the star I was looking for already through Google. I don't want to go find them again. So make sure that you actually handle that URL that's being sent to your app and make sure you're displaying the data the user is expecting.
Okay, and then, Jim, you'll be updating the blog page throughout the day, right?
Yep, I did. I added all the learning resources you see here and a link to download the updated version of the sample code, which I showed in there so that you can download that. It shows how to handle the images. And I'll probably put some code snippets in there that, for example, on the code that I showed for receiving images. So, yes.
I'll be covering C++ on Thursday with Android Intents, and we're going to use this common URL. So I'll add C++ links for CodeRidge videos and so on, and sample code for C++ to this same blog. So the URL that you see on the screen for blog notes will be used for both the Object Pascal one today and the C++ one on Thursday. So,
yep. So if you're looking for C++ code, come back Thursday and you'll get your fill.
Yep. Okay, Jim. Thank you very much for Android Intents with Object Pascal.
Sure. Thank you. So the question here: what would be a business case for using intents? Intents are really about interrupt communication. So the two situations. Let's see. 3 business cases for using intents. One would be, let's say you want to have multiple apps on available that work in harmony together. So you hand off something from one app to another app as the user's interacting with the app. So, for example, I believe I was reading something about this, that Evernote decided to spin off the scanning functionality of their app, the ability to scan an OCR like a business card. So they have a separate app that does that. So then you can scan an OCR something with the scanning app, and then the scanning app would then say, send you to Evernote to then store what it scanned. So that would be one business case, is where you have a collection of apps that work in harmony together. The other business case could be where you want to have your app respond to other apps that the user may use that are on the system beyond the ones you'd be generating. So, for example, like images. So let's say you wanted to create an app that you wanted to have your own image sharing service, your own image editing service, like you wanted to provide an app that used some of the image effects that are available through FireMonkey. So you could set your app up like I showed there, where it accepted any images, and then the user could then edit those images using the provided FireMonkey image filters. Maybe you want to add cropping or whatever you want to add to that, and then you could then have your app fire that share sheet to then share it back to another app. So that would be another business case where you want to involve yourself in a larger ecosystem. And then the third, and so that would be 2 examples of why you would be receiving intents. And then an example of when you would want to share intents would be that you want to, I guess it'd also be involving yourself in an ecosystem, or where you want to specifically leverage an existing app. So I've done previous sessions on, for example, building a barcode scanner. So instead of actually having to build your own barcode scanner, you can instead call, I did a session on this and I can't remember what it was. I think it was called the Zebra Crossing Barcode Scanner, where you can send an intent to that barcode scanner and say, hey, I need you to scan this barcode and give me the results of that. And so then your app then has barcode scanning functionality, but you don't have to actually implement that. And so you can then call that barcode scanner, or maybe call the Evernote OCR utility or something along those lines, call another app and leverage that app, and then have that app give you the results back. And we didn't get into the details of starting an activity for result, but we've covered that before in the barcode scanning one.
So there are analogs or examples on other platforms as well, where you share data between different apps under the covers. I mean, the simpler way would be to, I guess, to leave something on a clipboard and then you switch apps and go and paste from a clipboard, for example. But this is so much better. You're not doing that kind of multi-step process. You're sending the data direct to another app, and if that app knows about that MIME type, that data type, then it just gets launched and it receives the data. You don't have to go through a multi-step process.
Right.
As an example, Windows 10, what is it? Shared contracts, where you can define in a more formal way now in Windows 10 sharing of data between apps.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you've got some data that could go to a spreadsheet or some data that could go to a paint program, whatever it might be, as you were mentioning in the bitmap example. So there's lots of those things. It just turns out Android calls this intents, and sharing the intents reading, sharing intents, reading intents, as an under-the-covers way of doing things. Drag and drop on systems that have, mice, for example, where you can grab something and drag and dropping it, but we don't have the notion of mice on these little mobile devices.
Yeah, and actually, so with the image one, I showed that the intent contains a URI that points to a content provider, and so the different ways you share different things, if you're going to patch into that, you want to make sure you understand the methodologies behind how content is shared so that you are plugging into that effectively. So if you want to receive an image, you need to understand that you get the URI to a content provider and you need to decode the stream and everything like I showed. So that's, you need to consult the Android documentation. And it's interestingly, most people don't realize this, but like if you're using like Excel and you copy a big group of cells and then you close Excel, you get that little dialog pops up and says, hey, you put a lot of data in the clipboard. Do you want to leave that there? It may use a lot of memory. And the reason it does that, interestingly, is it doesn't actually copy that to the clipboard yet. Windows actually has this expanded clipboard functionality where the data doesn't get copied to the clipboard until it gets pasted. So what happens is when you copy some data in Excel and go to paste it someplace else, as soon as you paste it, whatever you're pasting to says, hey, I know how to receive as rich a data as you want to give me Excel, so give me the full spreadsheet, the full spreadsheet experience of the data that's being copied, and then it'll give it to you as Excel. Because you copy it into Notepad, Notepad's like, text, please, and so then it gives it just as text. And so it's the same sort of thing as that we saw here, is that the receiving app makes a call back to the sender in order to get the data. And so that's just like we saw with the intents, is that you receive just a link to the content provider, and then the content provider provides the actual data back. So it's actually very similar in functionality between Windows and Android from that point of view. Is there some way to know what apps are sending intents in a specific environment? I'm not sure. I think a lot of this you can view from Logcat. I'm not sure if you can view all the intents from Logcat. Probably not. So when somebody's using, in order to start an activity, so the main building block of an Android application is an activity. In FireMonkey, we have the FMX native activity as the main activity of our apps, and typically that's the only activity of our apps. If someone's using other development tools, they'll have multiple activities, and the way a single app launches other activities is with explicit intents, where it explicitly says, activity 1 explicitly says, hey, activity 2, start with this data. And so within a single application, you can have intents going back and forth between the activities. So you're not going to get access to those because those are explicitly pointing to a certain receiving activity. Now, as far as being able to get access to find out other intents that are being passed around, you could go and look at some of the MIME types that are supported and just say, hey, I'll receive these and see what happens. Most of the time, so for example, I showed you that one ES notepad that showed up and said, hey, I can receive text Pascal. It doesn't know what a text Pascal file is. It just says I can receive text. And actually that ES program will show up in lots of different, anytime you share anything, ES will say, hey, I know how to view images. Hey, I know how to view videos. Hey, I know how to view text. It just does that. So you can put a lot of wildcards in there and say, I can do anything. And that means you'll get lots of notifications. And so that could be a way that you could find out what some of the other intents that are being passed out there are, is just by putting some wildcards in there and see what happens. Okay. So Brian said, I like what you said about image sharing. At first I thought that would not be a business process, but I'm sure that insurance companies would disagree. Yeah, that's a great point. You could use that for business purposes, from getting collecting pictures for insurance. We had an insurance claim recently at our house, and there was a lot of interesting stuff they're doing. Actually, they're using this. She had this laser tape measure for measuring rooms that she'd come in and she'd use that. And I was thinking, that needs to be Bluetooth, and it needs to talk to her smartphone that she's using to take the pictures and collect all that data automatically. That would be really, really cool, I think. So maybe that's a process, Internet of Things app someone could put together. I'm not sure if there's a Bluetooth LE version or a tape measure yet, but there should be. Is there an iOS equivalent to Android Intents? So there is an iOS, you can send URLs on iOS, and actually recently just expanded this, I believe in iOS 9, I think it was. It's there, though, you're just sending a URL directly. Intents, you're actually building this object and putting things in the object and setting properties on the object. iOS, I believe all you do is send this URL, and that URL can have information in it, like as arguments, parameters on the URL. So that's the iOS equivalent.
Yeah, there's app extensions that you can use.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you can do app extensions where you can. That's right. So you can. How does that work? So you can say, "Hey, I know how to answer these things." I haven't even looked at those yet. Yeah, that's right. They did expand that you can do the app extensions. And so your app basically says, "I know how to." Oh, yeah, look at that. That's a really good point. App extensions.
Keyboard, you want a certain keyboard, and so on. But there's just a few of those. I mean, we use ShareSheet to do some share things. There's still a clipboard as well. But yeah, check out the app extensions programming for iOS. And as Jim mentioned, URLs are sort of baked in.
I'll have to look at that. Maybe we can get a skill sprint next quarter on app extensions with Apple. I remember hearing that, oh, they finally got the stuff that like Android has for Intents, and then I forgot all about it.
There was a question about knowing who's sending stuff. Most people seem to be suggesting they use the extras to provide some information from one app to another, saying, hey, I'm the one who's sending you this stuff, the name of your application or whatever.
Yeah, so there are a number of other extras you can do besides the extra text. So you can take a look at that. There's a link to that. There's two Android documentation links on that Learning Resources page, blog notes down at the bottom. So there's the intent filters one like you see here, and there's another one just on intents. If you go to that one, that actually has a list of all the different extras you can include in it. So you can interrogate the extras, to find out some additional information about like what's being sent to you and stuff like that. So Brian's asking, is there a chance that there would be a Delphi unit in the foreseeable future that would make it easy to run intents on both platforms? So they wouldn't be intents on both platforms, but there would be it's conceivable, there is a chance in the foreseeable future that there could be a unit that does that, whether it's part of the shipping RTL or if it's something a third party develops. It's hard to say for sure, but yeah, it should be possible because iOS now has some similar functionality for example, sharing pictures back and forth, the app extensions. Yeah.
You're going to still run the Windows 10 shared contracts is still different. I know you can get the who's the app that sent and did they receive it, accept it, and so on. There's some events you can hook. So check out the shared contracts sample that ships in 10 Seattle. But still, with intents, you still have to go into the manifest for Android, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wouldn't be an intent in that respect. It'd be more like maybe some extension to ShareSheet to share more things or sharing, some mechanism. I mean, you could always use app tethering, but that uses TCP/IP, right? You could have two. You could have two iOS apps or two Android apps or one iOS and one Android app, and you could use app tethering to send whatever data you want back and forth. Right? But again, that's not in memory between applications. And the other thing is on iOS, there's no real shared directory in the sense every app is in its own sandbox. So that's where the mechanism of app extensions and the share sheet mechanism allows you to do some sharing across applications.
And I did have back in XE5 timeframe, I had a unit from a code rage session I did on how to send URLs from both Android and iOS. And so, for example, if you wanted to send an email with the default email program, or if you wanted to open up the map app on both platforms, and it showed how to do that. And it was a single unit that you could then use, that you could call, and it would open up a map or open up a email application or open contact, something like that, across both Android and iOS. And it was it's a one-way track, and so that worked across both platforms. I'll see if I can dig that up and include a link to that. I think there may have been some changes. I need to make sure it still works in 10 Seattle, but it should be hopefully pretty straightforward to update it for that.
Yeah, that looks like those are all the questions. A couple of people coming in about, again, iOS differences and so on, but that'll be great, Jim, to update the blog post. And again, Jim's got the blog, so there's some of the links, and notice there's an updated link. Okay, Jim, thank you very much for Android Intense with Object Pascal.
Sure, thank you. Lots of fun. All right, talk to everybody later. Bye-bye.
See you again. Bye.